Welcome to a live episode of Surviving the Survivor. We bring you the best guests in all of true crime. Don't forget to subscribe and smash that like button. Here's your host, Emmy Award-winning broadcaster, Joel Waldman.
What's up, STS Nation? Happy Monday to everybody, and welcome to Surviving the Survivor, the podcast that promises to bring you the very best guests in all of true crime. And tonight will be no different. Of course, we are discussing the Karen Read trial, the trial that seems to have exploded in terms of its popularity, its notoriety, and all of the above. It seems to be the trial that everyone is speaking about right now. Of course, it revolves around Karen Read, who is on trial for the murder of her Boston police officer boyfriend, John O'Keefe. He was found dead the evening of January 29, 2022 in a driveway in Canton, Massachusetts. And a lot of people believe that this has been a conspiracy, a so-called Canton cover-up, while others believe that, in fact, Karen Read did hit police officer John O'Keefe. And who knows? We may never get the answer fully, but everyone, I think, agrees that we want justice for police officer John O'Keefe. And here are the best guests. It is Alyte Mazeika, if I am pronouncing it correctly.
Yeah.
She is a practicing attorney and a member of the California and DC bar. She is a graduate of the University of Texas, Hook 'em Horn School of Law, and UCSD, University of California, San Diego. And you may know her by her extremely popular YouTube channel called Legal Bites, BYTES. Next up, Mark Betterow, the unflappable criminal defense attorney. He is based in New York City, a former Manhattan prosecutor. And I was away. We were actually on our book tour in Tallahassee last week when this inverted video was shown during the trial. And I believe back when that was brought into evidence, Mark Betterow said, "Game over." So I'm wondering what he thinks about today's testimony. If that was game over, then it must be really over today. But we're about to ask him and find out. And of course, last but not least, returning here is Morgietta Derzier. Both these guests giving me a run for my money with their names, but Morgietta, very well attuned to this case. She is a Boston-based defense attorney, and she is here to lay down the law, so to speak. So we'll give the new guest, who is Alina let us know she's coming to us from hotel Wi-Fi today. So been going in and out a little bit, but Alina,
sorry about that.
No, it's all good. Your bird's eye view of this case up to this point, and we're a good ways in now with the Commonwealth, I believe, and the judge even saying that we should be done by end of June. It is almost mid-June here, June 10th. Your bird's eye view so far.
On this particular case, bird's eye view, I mean, today, though, she had to revisit that early on in the day because she already said, as a result of the voir dire that's going to be apparently necessary for these expert witnesses to come in on the defense side, she already said, you know, I literally just told the jury we were going to be done by the end of June. Now I'm not so sure. So we'll see how that goes on the timing. Of course, my own folks that have been watching with me so far know of my own frustrations with the schedule of this court. I mean, there weren't even supposed to be any Fridays where any testimony was happening to begin with. And now we've had like five Fridays with testimony at this point or something like that. So I always take those kinds of things from the judge at this point with a grain of salt. But as far as the actual overall case is looking, we're still in the prosecution's case in chief. So I'm still keeping a door open for the prosecution that maybe they're going to bring in some evidence that is going to somehow blow this case wide open. But it just seems like things are going from bad to worse for the prosecution so far.
I would have to agree with you on that. And today it went from bad to worse to really ugly. Morgietta, you know, I've heard, I'm always, and I've pulled a bunch of tweets that will rile people up on both sides of this. But I'm just wondering, obviously, there was some really misogynistic points of view brought up by Trooper Michael Proctor today, Morgietta. And from what I understand, and I hope I'm right about this, I believe there are 10 women on this jury. A word that rhymes with bunt or hunt was used by Michael Proctor. It starts with the letter C. How is this going to play to the jurors, do you think, Morgietta, on top of everything else that we've seen?
Well, you know, we've talked about this so many times. Jury trials are way different than bench trials, right? And so juries are really susceptible to even the smallest things like word choice, which has come up, I think, pretty frequently. You know, people have cracked jokes and in between like the directs and cross, and the jury takes their job very, very seriously. And so, you know, the prosecution has put on, especially in their particular order, some interesting witnesses in terms of like their delivery. And I think that this is definitely one of those situations where I don't think it's going to blow over well with them. They're already tired. It's a long trial. Some of the witnesses, in my opinion, have not come off really credible. And this witness, Proctor, everyone has been waiting to hear a lot of information. And now we hear this, and it's just not going to mull over, in my opinion, very well with them. So, you know, it's not looking too good.
Yeah, I would have to agree with that. Look at this, Lyd Ritz, new to the channel here from Legal Bites. This is why I love having other YouTubers on. Yeah, Steve Cohen likes to say, "A rising tide lifts all ships." Hopefully, you will enjoy both communities. And Lyd, hopefully, we'll see you back here on another day. Mark Betterow, to you. I'm just going to read you 2:45 p.m. Michael Proctor's on the stand, and he's testifying about personal texts that he sent on the day of John O'Keefe's death. He was texting with a group of friends, and I quote here, he says, "There will be some serious charges brought on the girl." He is referring to Karen Reed. So right there, grown woman referring to her as a girl. Another friend chimes in, "Is she hot at least?" And then he replies, and I quote, "She's a babe with a weird Fall River accent, but she has no," I won't use the word he used that rhymes with lass, but she has no behind, he says. And he also uses a crude term for women to describe her. And that is the word that rhymes with hunt or bunt, starts with a C. What'd you make of that exchange when we heard that in court? And if the inverted Sallyport video was game over, what is this?
Well, you really have to tie the two issues together. I mean, the problem with the inverted video is that it conceals the very witness who made all of these things. So you don't even view this in isolation. But just starting with the messages are a disaster. They are disgusting. They are offensive. They are misogynist. They demonstrate an actual bias against Karen Reed, which is a pretty rare thing for a police officer to have, as opposed to a general bias. I mean, this guy clearly has an animus towards her. And, you know, Joel, you mentioned January 29th. These messages went on and on and on for month after month to fellow police officers, to Canton police officers, to his own family, to his friends. I mean, this is sick at a level that you would rarely see. And this is the DA's main police witness that they've been essentially hiding for the last 6 weeks, that you've been hearing more and more about. And this follows, you know, the key is, again, putting this all together. This follows testimony from one of his other colleagues, in fact, supervisor, okay, who you now know endorsed this behavior by laughing at it, which is disgusting and disgraceful and offensive. But after his own supervisor on his direct examination deliberately misled the jury about what that video was. And it's not just that the video was inverted, it's what the purpose of the inversion was. It took the taillight out of the picture and took Michael Proctor out of the picture. And only when the witness finally acknowledges it on cross do you see that. But then when it comes out today, before Proctor even testifies, it comes out that there's another video which shows the correct side, which is missing 42 minutes of footage. And when the footage kicks in, who's standing at the taillight? Michael Proctor. This is beyond a disaster, because the frame up theory is gaining more and more traction each day. And if that's not bad enough, before you transition to the messages that you heard today, the prosecutor, for some reason, which I'll never understand, calls another witness, clearly a credible police officer from Dighton, I guess the town was, who has no interest in anything. He's just responding to a call from Karen Reed's father or something about it. Just, she's distraught, whatever it is. And he comes in and he says, the car had kind of a crack, a dent, which is totally consistent with a polycarbonate lamp or plastic hitting another hard object. But he made it clear it definitely wasn't shattered. He's got no skin in the game. And that's followed by the witness with these just disgusting text messages. Already is not believable. Already is on the verge of a jury believing he probably planted evidence, who then comes in and is the one who found close to 45 pieces of shattered taillight, which is not consistent with credible evidence that he says he found over the course of a couple of weeks, him and the guy who endorsed these messages. And then he comes in, you hear all these messages. And the worst of it is the DA attempts to kind of deflate the balloon on direct, which many people would say is a smart move to just kind of prevent this from coming out on cross. But then he does it in such a pathetic and heartless fashion without any sense of emotion or getting, sincerity that this is wrong. And what he does is he exposes Proctor to looking like he doesn't have any remorse about what he did. He's upset that he got caught. His reaction was not that of somebody who was sincere. He never looked at Karen Reed once from 10 feet away and said, "I'm sorry." And then ultimately what he said was the reason that he did this, according to the prosecutor, at the elicitation of the prosecutor, was although it was juvenile and stupid, she's guilty. And I have all this compelling evidence, and that somehow justified what I did. So this was, of all the bad trial days, by far the most pathetic. And in terms of what impact this will have, the jury, they're human beings, 10 of whom are women. How are they not going to despise him and just find him to be a vile human being, probably a corrupt police officer, but certainly someone who, for all the reasons that we've talked about today and other days, is not worthy of belief. So this case is gone.
Gone with the wind. That Dighton police officer is Sergeant Nicholas Barros. And it's a good point by Mark. Why bring this guy in? He did seem incredibly capable. No skin in the game from anybody's vantage point. He did say that he did notice some damage to the rear taillight, that a little piece was cracked and a piece was missing. And, he had, there was no defense cross of this witness. So he was up, but he could be critical in terms of sort of, in terms of the credibility that he brings to the case. Jen Georgie here. So Lally gets 6 weeks and defense gets 2. Not fair. Proctor was hideous today. Alita, your response to this comment? I mean, I don't think the defense needs to at this point.
Well, I was going to say, to be fair, I think the defense has really had 6 weeks so far. It technically has been the prosecution's case in chief, but have they really made much, if any, headway? I guess we could torture everyone and say, what, if any, headway has the prosecution actually made in this particular case? So, do they really need it? I don't think so. I don't think they need a full 6 weeks. The fact that the prosecution has even taken up 6 weeks with this many witnesses, I would argue they could have benefited from cutting out a lot of these witnesses that have testified at this point. And, a great example is this morning's Dighton officer, Nicholas Barros, because I completely agree. I don't understand why the prosecution called him today, because he wasn't at all helpful for their testimony. It was the same story as with Carrie Roberts, how the defense just said, no cross, Your Honor. Yeah, total power move by saying, we don't need to cross-examine this witness. We're perfectly fine with the testimony that came in through this witness already. And on top of that, even before getting to those terrible, awful, offensive, horrific text messages that came out of Trooper Proctor's phone, before all of that leapt out into the courtroom, there already was the issue with Officer Barrows testifying about the taillight being just cracked a little bit and only missing a few pieces. And then Lally making another interesting choice, I guess you could call it, by having Trooper Proctor show the jury the taillight with most of those pieces missing. It's completely contradictory to how the testimony. There have been a few times throughout this trial when Lally has done something like that, where he's shown through evidence how something looks according to one way versus another way. The same thing happened when on one of the days where the red Solo cups came in, and on the very same day he showed through one of the witnesses a very well put together evidence bag with evidence coming out the way that it should be. You know, they've got their gloves on and everything, the way that you would expect evidence to come in. And it was on the same day that those red Solo cups were introduced to the jury. That just was so perplexing. Like, why would you have those two things on the same day so that the jury has a direct thing to compare this thing to? It's just, there have been so many choices like that I just have not understood throughout this trial.
That's an interesting point. Patty P, this is not an interesting point. Did Joel even watch? No, I crochet all day. Don't watch the trial at all. Never watch it. Hang out. I'm playing cards all day. I was in the live today. Obviously, you're probably watching a different channel. Morgietta, to you. Mark Betterow made a point here about Lally. You know, when this misogyny was on full display for the world to see, not just the Norfolk County courthouse and the people inside. Lally didn't really do much to try to quell it, or, you know, even make some sort of statement. You know, cops talk, you know, like this behind closed doors, something along those lines to try to quell the disaster that was playing out in front of him. Are you surprised by that? Or is Lally just one of these guys? I mean, we've seen him now enough. He's sort of emotionless, sort of stoic, I guess. But I don't know if he's also lacking some brain power in terms of, you know, being able to massage the jury back into, you know, some semblance of normalcy after what they witnessed today.
You know, I think a lot of people have said this from the beginning. Even when you look at what Karen Reed is charged with, it's no question that a lot of people believe that she's overcharged. So going into a trial like this, where there's already this notion and this theory that Lally has a lot of work to do, right? With just the charges and the facts of the way that they are, you can see, at least I've seen over the course of all of these weeks, that there have been a dwindling in what he believed his power was, right? Because the defense team has been coming in so strong with all of their cross-examinations that, you know, the fight is not there. It really isn't, right? His job is to, you know, to protect the citizens of the Commonwealth. And we do have to circle back at the fact that a life was lost. But in my opinion, there's a lot of that you're looking for from the prosecution to put in that work that really hasn't been here. And so now you're at the 11th hour where the prosecution supposedly is getting ready to wrap up their case in chief, and you're not seeing that you know, effort to try to, you know, reel in what you believe is the strongest points of your case to the jury. And it's kind of sad to watch at this point, because, you know, you're hoping for that big shebang from the prosecution, that big, you know, aha moment, and just the flow of the way that case has been presented from the prosecution. Me personally, I wouldn't have done it that way. I know a lot of my colleagues also agree that they would not have presented this case in this particular way as well. because again, it's confusing, it's redundant, but it just kind of goes to show that, especially when you have a case that's overcharged and you have a really, really high hill to climb, it will definitely take a toll on you as a trial attorney. And I no doubt about that. That's what's happening here.
Joel,
go ahead, Mark. No, go ahead, Mark.
To follow up a little bit on that point, they're 7 weeks in, okay, close to purportedly wrapping this up. Never mind whether Karen Reed did it or not, so they claim. They have yet to establish that a crime occurred. I mean, you're 7 weeks into this, and there is absolutely zero evidence that John O'Keefe's death resulted from a crime. And just again, tie this back to this fiasco with Proctor and all these other guys. Presumably, the witness who ought to tie that together at some point, which probably should have been, I don't know, 6 weeks ago, is the medical examiner. Well, guess what Proctor did today to the medical examiner's credibility? Absolutely kneecapped it, because these people, Yuri, his boss, and Proctor, are basically texting each other, talking about how do we intimidate, that's my word, not their words, but how do we bully the medical examiner to give us the ruling that we need? And then a funny thing happened. After she couldn't give a cause of death, a manner of death, she never gave them that, interestingly enough. But she gave them something else. Fine, I'll say it wasn't the result of a fight, which we've always been kind of scratching our head saying, where is this coming from? That reeks of police involvement. That's not how autopsy reports are written. And you got it today through Lally, of all people, establishing that this is the case. And the reality is, this is not meant to be personally offensive, but this guy is way out of his depth, okay? He has no business prosecuting a serious case like this. They've offered nothing. The medical examiner, who's only going to be the last one to really offer them anything at this point, her opinion is totally going to be discredited by Proctor and the text messages again. So I don't know what they're doing, and wondering why they don't just walk into court on Wednesday and say, Your Honor, we're going to move to dismiss because this is wrong and we can't prove this. And we've humiliated her enough, because one thing they did do today, whether you think Karen Reed is guilty or not, is they subjected her to a level of humiliation that nobody in a courtroom should be subjected to based on the conduct of a police officer.
Yeah. Alita, on that comment from Mark, is there any chance, because I've seen this comment come up in the chat, that there's a motion to dismiss from the Commonwealth, that we could walk in? Is there a chance in hell that happens?
I mean, I don't know, because you would think that would have come when they first became aware of these text messages themselves, right, before we even got to this point, that they would have been like, you know what, let's spare ourselves this massive embarrassment and do. But so the fact that they knew about it, I mean, Lally's the one introducing it. For once, he is getting ahead of bad information in this trial, but is he actually getting ahead of it? No. Usually the way that you get ahead of it is to actually take the sting out of it, is you ask questions in such a way that the witness is able to contextualize, to explain. But even when given the opportunity, the witness is not able to explain himself as to why he said what he said. And basically he said, well, because 16 or 18 hours into this investigation, I made the determination that she definitely was the one who did it. And that's why I said all of these terrible things. That's not a good explanation. None of these have been good explanations. So, you know, will they willingly dismiss this case? I think that, I suspect, and, you know, this is obviously, you know, speculation, so take it with a grain of salt, but my suspicion is that they probably determined when they got these text messages, well, we're in too deep. This is too much of a media circus. This is too big of a thing. We can't just walk away from it now, because there are just too many people that, you know, want to see this trial happen, or something along those lines, and just decided to proceed with it. So if they decided that back then, I don't know what's any different now that it's all out there in front of everyone.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And Morgietta, real quick, I'm sorry, Mark, but Morgietta, and I'm coming back to you in a second, Mark, but Morgietta, I think while Proctor and friends were texting, one of them, it might have been him, but I think it was one of his friends, who literally said something like, oh, you didn't contact the medical examiner? That's a rookie mistake, meaning you didn't like lean on this medical examiner yet. Is Mark right? I mean, is this medical examiner now persona non grata because of what these guys are basically saying in terms of forcing the medical examiner's hand?
Yeah, two points on that. I have tried a number of cases in Norfolk County. That's where this courthouse is, and I would bet money, that pigs would fly first before I would ever see a Norfolk County prosecutor dismiss their case in the middle of a case. That's just my personal experience. I will hang myself on that cross, but I've had many cases that I'm like, what are we doing here? So if this is Lally's position, I'm sure it's not him personally. I'm sure it's coming from the higher up powers that be, but I'll just leave that for that. My own personal opinion. You can crucify me if you want. Back to your point. Yeah, it's and this is why jury trials are a blessing and a curse, in that they are hugely susceptible to influence, right? And so, as Mark beautifully said, they tainted any testimony that this medical examiner is going to give is now tainted, because the taste that has been left in their mouth is this, for lack of better words, boys club conversation, backroom conversation about Karen Reed, who's sitting right there. And these are conversations, as you said, that went on for months and months and months, in a case where the theory is a cover-up, right? And so how can you now take any information from any credible person with a degree or without a degree, when that is the taste that's being left in your mouth? And then just looking at all the other evidence that has been presented, right? There, in my opinion, I have never seen a case that just has had so many WTFs. Like, you'll have one thing here and one thing there, but between the taillight and the solo cups and the text message, I mean, it's all there, right? So as a juror, I can see them just literally, their head is spinning on a swivel. Even if you wanted to believe the person with a degree, how can you? Because it literally looks like they have been influence. And not for nothing, as I said before, Canton is a very small town, right? It's part of the South Shore, but it's a small town community, and people know it's a small town community. So that's kind of like the icing on top of this confidential case, that people know it's a small town. So why wouldn't that be true? You know what I mean? So it's hard. It really is hard for them.
Yeah, Mark, I wanted to get you to get your comment in, but this question's been up for a while. This was this morning before the jury came in. What does Mark feel about the judge not hearing the argument the defense was making on a motion at the beginning of the day? They were basically the Commonwealth said that the defense has been sneaky with them about witnesses. They didn't have time to prepare for some dog bite witness, and then Yannetti went off, teed off on the Commonwealth, and Judge Beverly Cannoni had to step in there. But Mark, if you care to comment on this and then make the point that I know you were waiting to make.
I mean, the first comment about this is, I mean, it feels like an issue that's shuffling deck chairs on the Titanic with everything else that's going on. This feels like really small potatoes in the grand scheme of real problems in the case. But I didn't think the judge was great this morning. I thought, she was kind of back to her huffing and puffing that we heard in the early part. And the reality is this: what Yannetti was trying to say was that in his view, the prosecution was taking shots at his ethics and conduct in a publicly filed document vis-a-vis some of the issues in this motion. And he wanted to correct the record and defend himself, defend his client, and wrap it into the context of the motion. And the judge's response was, I don't want to hear the histrionics. I don't want to hear, the jury trial shenanigans. There's no jury here, and basically didn't want to hear it and shut him down. And I mean, I understand why she doesn't want to hear that, but I think you have to give the guy a chance to respond to allegations if he's being accused of unethical behavior. And I credit him for pushing back as far as he could, to defend himself and defend a client on a case like this, knowing that he may get yelled at or whatnot. But that team is highly invested in this. It's clear. It's also clear, unlike Lally, they believe in their client's case. Okay. Lally looks like he doesn't have any core principles at all that he believes in, that he just goes to court and goes home and comes back. And that kind of segues to the second point that I was going to make and follow up. What they need to do is dismiss the case. And it's terrible to hear, like, it never happens in Norfolk County. And I believe it based upon what we're seeing. But, and I also take the point that was made, if they didn't do it after they saw the messages, that they're too far in and it's a big case. But what they need to do is address a crisis of character that they have in that office. Okay. They wear the white hats. These are supposed to be the good guys. Okay. I was a prosecutor. Many other people were prosecutors. You're supposed to do justice. And sometimes you lose a case against somebody you think is guilty. But if you don't have any evidence that's going to prove someone's guilt, you can't charge them. And if this is the kind of case that they won't dismiss now, given everything that's going on and everything that's being exposed, then the people who live in Norfolk County need to vote and change, because their conduct in this case is disgraceful. And Lally, or Morrissey, or whoever is ultimately responsible for this, whether or not they don't want to do it because they're going to feel foolish and we've already made a big mess out of this, morally, legally, ethically, they need to do what's right. And putting Karen Reed through this day after day shouldn't be happening. And the fact that today it didn't end already, that she had to be publicly subjected to people hearing about allegations of her mental health, her physical health, her physical appearance as a woman, and all of this other stuff is just disgraceful. And I think there's a real crisis in that office if they lack the character and courage to say right is right, wrong is wrong, this case is over. And for them to just say, let's play it out, let the jury do what they're going to do, it's not right. And I think it's highly offensive to lawyers like us who all do this for a living. Those of us who used to prosecute in particular, they just seem to have no willingness to do the right thing. And you've seen it throughout this entire case, even with Morrissey himself, with that ridiculous press conference he did, which was a summation of his case and was totally improper. So when are they going to stop this and do the right thing in this office?
So, Mark, if I understand you correctly, which I think I do, the only saving grace for the Commonwealth at this point is to dismiss the case, in your opinion.
Right. It's not only just saving grace, it's the right thing to do. I mean, in my view, and people disagree with this, they never should have brought the case. I mean, I've told you that before, Joel, and a lot of people disagree with that. But to me, this had so many obvious red flags that don't make sense, that probably should have called for a little more pause, reevaluation. Certainly when all those federal materials were disclosed, I agree that was a moment, right, if there hadn't been one before, to say, what are we doing? And also to recognize, why do you think the federal government gave all of those materials to the parties? That was two big middle fingers to the Norfolk DA saying, this is wrong, you shouldn't be doing this. And still they go. And to walk into this train wreck day after day, they may very well have subjected Proctor to prosecution himself by the feds. They may very well have subjected Brian Higgins. I think his testimony was perjured, and just based on what we were watching in many ways, they may very well have gotten themselves, I'm talking the prosecutors, into some kind of mix in this when all is said and done. I don't know what they're doing, but the right thing to do would have been a long time ago to punt.
There you go. You got to comment on this one, Mark, and then we're getting back to Alita. Betterow is on fire. He's everywhere. Attorney Betterow, please come to Mass and run for Norfolk District Attorney. Is that going to ever happen? You're a giant Bostonian at heart. You're a Patriots fan. You're a Celtics fan. Will this happen, Mark?
No. And for what it's worth, I grew up in Middlesex County, so I would be more partial there.
Yeah. And by the way, I grew up in Middlesex County, New Jersey, but I went to college in Middlesex County, Massachusetts at Brandeis. This is for Mark Betterow, but we can't have him hog the entire show. So I'm going to send this over to Alita. It's Judge Beverly Cannoni, but they call her Auntie Bev. Take this from a legal stand. You're the legal bites queen here, Alita. Can the judge limit the defense's time to put on their case in chief?
I mean, within reason, if they start putting on witness after witness after witness that is not really material to the particular case. However, I mean, I said within reason, they also have to remember that the defendant has certain rights that are involved. We don't care about the rights of the state in this case. We care about the rights of the defendant. And so the defense has to be able to put on their case in chief, and to the extent that they need to, which was another issue with this morning's motion hearing. It was, and the fact that the judge cut off David Yannetti and making the arguments that he felt that he needed to make for his client. And at the end of the day, if the defense actually ends up getting what they want, it's going to be water under the bridge. Who really cares at the end if there's no harm, no foul? However, there is at this point still a chance that doesn't happen. And if that doesn't happen and he hasn't been able to make those arguments, it's the same kind of issue here where the defense is trying to put on their case. And if they are limited in the arguments that they can make, there's some appealable issues potentially if she doesn't end up getting acquitted.
Morgietta, I just want to read. So this is a little bit of a lengthy tweet. It's from my friend Bob Mata at Defense Diaries. Check out his podcast. So he tweeted out, so Lally did in fact front all of the bad facts / text messages on direct, and it was much worse than anticipated. Not only were Proctor's descriptions of then suspect Karen Reed repugnant, the abuse of power reflected in those messages by Proctor has torpedoed this case. There is no response that he could have given on the stand that will ever allow the jury to find that he is a credible cop. It's scary to think that a professional with that much power is heading investigations wherein people's lives and liberty are at stake. I feel awful for the O'Keefe family because if Karen is the culprit, I just don't believe this jury can or will convict her on this evidence based on this investigation. Let's talk about this. Here's a guy, the lead investigator, who is a despicable human being by all accounts. I think he deserves all the heat he's about to take and has been taking. But it could prevent the O'Keefes from ever getting the justice that they deserve. It's a really horrible spot for the legal system itself to be in, isn't it?
It is. And like I said in the previous comment, it's sad, right? If you have to take a word to kind of categorize this, because at the end of the day, a life was lost and we may never know. I mean, we're how many witnesses in and we still don't really know legally based upon this case, but overall, just the way that the investigation was conducted, I feel for the O'Keefe family because this looks like a joke to them. Their family member died, and witness after witness after witness, they don't even, I don't think, have real answers as to what actually happened and when did it happen and how did it happen. And I think that is not only sad, but very troubling for, again, I hate to say small town, but a small town where you vote, you believe, in the system, that in a town where you're living and you're paying taxes and you're doing all these things and you cannot even get credible information, whether Karen Reed is innocent or guilty, but just give me the facts. What happened to my loved one? And I don't even think they're giving the justice just on that fact alone, when it's just a mess. It's just a mess across the board. And I could only imagine what they're going through being a part of what we can just kind of coin phrase as a circus, watching this, trial go on, and they're not really getting any concrete answers, right? And so, I hope that the medical examiner is not the last witness to be called, but we need that information. And at this point, as we stated before, that information is not even going to be as helpful to them because everything else is being laughed at, right? And so how do you even go into getting credible information from the medical examiner as to how your loved one passed away when everything else is becoming laughable, in the sense that nothing is concrete, nothing is straightforward, and it's just really troubling altogether.
I have to agree with that. Miss CC here. Are we ever going to get non-defense attorney guests on here? While offensive, there is no evidence of a frame or conspiracy. Look, I'll be the first to admit when I was hearing Turtle Boy and others ranting and just going on these tirades about this conspiracy, I didn't buy it. I'm very pro law enforcement, I think, inherently, and I'm not necessarily thinking that these officers in any way were responsible for John O'Keefe's death, but I am certainly taking a second and third, a fourth, a fifth look, and I am questioning things that I had never questioned before. I'm curious, Alita, if you experienced something similar, and to Miss Cece's point, she's kind of playing devil's advocate that there's no evidence of the frame up. You heard Mark say there's no evidence of even a crime being committed. What do you say?
So, I mean, I was very similar to you in the beginning of being very reticent of any kind of a frame theory in this particular case. And I guess one of the most consistent criticisms that I think viewers have of me and my commentary is that I take too long to come to a conclusion. I waffle a little bit too much because I always want to be open-ended to both sides. And in fact, for this particular case, I came up with a primer video right before trial where I say it could be this, it could be that. This is one side, this is the other side. This is, evidence that is sort of being argued about on either side. And you can actually go and see the comments on there. Like, do you have any thoughts on your own about this particular case? That's one of the biggest criticisms. That's
Her hotel Wi-Fi. She's going to come back. 3, 2, and she's frozen.
Okay. I'm back.
You're back.
Sorry. The timing of my internet dropping has been okay up to now. But it's the beauty of a fact-based analysis is that you can change your opinion over time based on the evidence that you see in front of you. And, I still maintain that the prosecution theoretically can change my mind. If something absolutely blows my mind on Wednesday, with some evidence that actually comes out. At this point, I'm skeptical. I am, but I fully admit that if there is something that will change my mind on a particular piece, I will let people know. And I have done that so far in this trial in minor ways, not huge ways, but so the idea that somebody is going to be coming in and just because they have an opinion on a case does not necessarily mean that they have come in with bias. So I feel very strongly about that in all of these cases that we cover here.
Yeah. Mark, to you, I'm just wondering, as we go deeper and deeper into this, sort of along the same lines of what I was just asking, are you personally, and I don't know if you want to even divulge this, are you starting to think, I know you've said there's just no evidence of a crime, you don't really know what happened, but in your heart of hearts, are you starting to think that maybe this was a frame job and that something really nefarious did happen that night and they're trying to pin it on Karen Reed?
Yeah, but that's based on evidence. I mean, I don't know. Again, I have no idea what happened in the house. I don't know that John O'Keefe ever went in the house. I don't know whether any of the people that were in the house killed him or whatnot. But what you do know, factually, is that there are a weird set of circumstances which were greatly increased the plausibility thereof anyway in the last several days. So prior to the last week or so, you had all of these bizarre text messages going back and forth, many of which were deleted. Whatever you want to say about the Google search, that maybe we'll get more answer on the legitimacy of who made that. Although, the DA attacking Celebrite seems not like a great strategy, but we'll see where that comes out. But, you had all of these butt dials that were all made at a strange time, all at the wrong time. All of this happening a few minutes before Jennifer McCabe allegedly made this search. All these witnesses changing their stories once Proctor and the cops show up. So you start to think, all right, maybe there's something there. Then you find out that, John O'Keefe is allegedly hit by a car where the taillight made of polycarbonate shatters. Well, that doesn't make any sense. You haven't heard the medical evidence officially yet, but they leak all the autopsy photos online, and I mean that's kind of bad actually, and other stuff. but it's apparent that John O'Keefe has no injuries that even a layperson would say, how did the car hit him? How would it break the glass? Then you find out that the state police are saying we found all the glass over the course of 2 weeks by just driving by every day. And 2 witnesses use the exact same word. Evidence revealed itself. Give me a break. That's just not how that works in the real world. But then the twisted video, then the other video, and then you have what happened with Proctor today. And what you have to ask yourself, and what the defense is going to ask the jury, is very simply, I mean, take yourself for today. Whatever you thought about the possibility of Proctor, like cracking the taillight somehow and doing this, that sounds crazy. Would a cop do that? Do you feel that that's more or less likely after what you heard from this guy today, given his absolute illogical hatred of Karen Reed? We haven't even heard the real one. I wish she was dead. Okay. But all of this other stuff about here.
I think he said, I wish she would commit suicide, right?
Even worse.
Yeah.
But which makes no sense unless he has this real animus to her in light of everything else he said about her. And it just happens that he's the one who's seen in the Sally port around the taillight, that, and none of this other stuff that matches. And a jury is going to, these are intelligent people. Is that more or less likely to come from a guy who said these terrible things over the course of 8 or 9 months? And anyone who's being honest to the process is going to tell you, of course, it's more likely. So how is Lally, assuming they go to the finish line, which we all agree that they're going to do, or at least try, go down swinging, how are they going to tell a jury with a straight face, all of this stuff should be ignored? None of it makes any sense. And I think, yeah, if you want to move past guilt and non-guilt, which is all a jury is to determine, are there going to be more and more people who actually accept the idea as an exercise, an interesting exercise, not a courtroom exercise? Did she really get framed, and could she be actually innocent? Yeah, I think a lot more people are going to be leaning towards that, given these unexplainable coincidences and facts, which don't make any sense if you consider that she allegedly mowed him down and left him on the lawn with the injuries that he had.
Yeah. Morgietta, which brings us to another question. I mean, the Commonwealth on direct here. I'm wondering if they made another faux pas, because then they have Proctor in his own words admitting that Julie Albert, who's Chris Albert's wife, is friends with his sister, who he says admittedly that he is incredibly close with. So it just connects some of these nefarious players together, together, and it's coming right from the mouth of Michael Proctor. He goes, on occasion, they would be over at my sister's house or my parents' backyard, Julie and Chris and their kid Colin, and I would happen to be there. And of course, Colin is one of the people that was dragged into this, but it's almost like the Commonwealth is connecting the dots. Was that a mistake, Morgietta?
Again, I think Mark said it really well. These are all unexplained, right? Like, these are all unexplained connections, coincidences. And to be honest with you, I honestly don't think the Commonwealth had enough time to prep this case, because I have a hard time believing, really, really believing, that they didn't know some of this testimony was going to come out the way that it did. I would have never put a witness on with half of the information that has come out in this trial. Like, I would be embarrassed. And so the reality is that, a lot of opening and closing statements, use your common sense. You came in today with your common sense, and they will, and they did. And it's going to be, and this is not a prosecution, thought process or a defense process. This is a human being thought process. You cannot look at the evidence the way that it has been presented, with all of the, as Mark said, unexplained coincidences, and not have serious questions about what the allegations are. This is not a, again, win or lose. It's just looking at the facts and the way that they have been presented. It is really, really difficult for any human person, right? Whether you're into criminal defense or not, to just look at it and not go, that's kind of weird. Well, that's kind of weird too, right? And you normally, I mean, there are thousands and millions of cases, but usually you don't get that many unexplained coincidences in one case, right? And so the question the jury has is that $1 million question, which is reasonable doubt, right? And that's what we're talking about here. Reasonable doubt. Not all doubt, not 100% doubt, just reasonable doubt. And it's really hard. It's really hard to not fantasize about that reasonable doubt when you have so many of these unexplained coincidences.
I think you said it best, Morgietta. There are too many WTFs in this, and they're continuing on. From Bebe Collins to Alita, why does Michael Proctor immediately have such hatred for Karen Reed? I found myself asking the same question. The vile things you said, talking about her in such horrible ways. How can we believe he didn't have motive to plant evidence? But it's a great question. Why seemingly from the get-go was he showing all this incredible animus toward her? What do you think?
His explanation on the stand today was that because 16 to 18 hours in, he decided that she definitely was the one who did it, which is, like I said before, not a great explanation because it means he's making a conclusion way too early in this investigation and way before having even 24 hours on the case. It's way too soon, in my opinion, to have made that kind of a conclusion, and also doesn't justify the things that he said about her either way. It doesn't justify it at all.
Mark, to you, I mean, you've been a prosecutor and people asked you why you're no longer, and you said you have to pay the bills, which is as good a reason as any, I would say. But what, there's always, the public facing reason or the optics behind something, but what do you think is going on behind closed doors? And I'd like to ask Morgietta this as well when you're done, but what do you think is happening? They know they're getting destroyed in there right now. Adam Lally's, got to be going back to the office and, what the hell to himself. And Morrissey, same thing. I mean, what are they doing right now?
I have no idea what they're doing, because what they're doing from a legal standpoint makes no sense, as we've been talking about. I mean, this case is so far gone. It was so flawed from the beginning. At this point, there are other wrinkles that don't necessarily involve the jury, which could be motivating them. Everyone knows that the so-called federal boogeyman is hovering over all of this and has been, and that a lot of these witnesses were hauled before a grand jury for some reason that we may not necessarily know at this point. We know that investigation is ongoing. We know that Morrissey, the DA of the county, complained to Maine Justice about it, asking for an OPR investigation of the U.S. Attorney in Massachusetts. That's an Office of Professional Responsibility. That's kind of like a federal watchdog for misconduct by federal government employees and law enforcement. And that they got a response from the Justice Department in a couple of days saying, yeah, we think they're doing just fine in the District of Massachusetts, and we will have no further involvement in anything. And I hate to feel this way, but part of me wonders if this is all about self-preservation and just trying to, something that was said earlier, they're so far down the rabbit hole that it may not be we have to try the case because we don't want to get embarrassed, that we may have to try the case and try to punch our way out of this and pull a rabbit out of a hat and win, because that may be the only thing that saves us from other problems with the feds. Because I think the feds are going to be more interested in this rather than less, given the way stuff has come out in this trial. So I can't give you one possible good reason that anyone who is an honest broker in the Norfolk DA's office would say, this is the right thing to do. We're doing a good job. And even if we lose, it's all about seeking justice and all of that, which it should be. But I haven't a clue in good faith why they would be doing this at this point and continuing.
Morgietta, I just wanted to add on to that. And also, what about the other prosecutors in that office? They're watching this, obviously. They know that this is, at this point, a train wreck. It's got to be affecting the entire office. What do you think is happening behind closed doors?
Yeah, I agree. I don't know. I couldn't really point to one particular thing that's happening behind closed doors. But again, I will just say in my particular opinion, at least one friend prosecutor said, we speak as one voice, right? And so they realize that if this ship is going down, it does have credibility for their entire office. But I honestly do believe, like everyone has stated, that they are really in too deep at this point. And yes, the right thing is to, dismiss the case and move forward. But how do you do that in a graceful way where by dismissing this case, not only are you saying we as the prosecution is wrong, but look at the way that the evidence was presented, collected, investigated. They are also going to be indicating that there are multiple people in multiple departments that, for lack of better words, didn't do their job, right? And so how do you do that gracefully with still not having your own internal investigation come from that? Because it is so far gone that I think dismissing is going to perhaps be more hurtful in their eyes than to just go down swinging, which is really sad.
La Mesa here bringing up John O'Keefe, and this should be brought up a lot more. But did anyone call John O'Keefe officer today, even once, thinking of him and his family, and Karen and hers as well? Alyte, I'm just wondering from you, we're talking about dismissing this case. I sit there and I look at Paul O'Keefe. His family's been to hell and back. I mean, just awful things that have happened to his family, really tragic. And in my mind's eye, in my heart of hearts, I think he believes that Karen Read did do this, whether by accident or with intent. And it appears, at least right now, that his family is not going to get any sort of justice, whether it was a so-called Canton cover-up or whether Karen Read did, in fact, hit his brother. How do we square that? I mean, what do the O'Keefes deserve here outside of the obvious, which is being justice? I mean, how do they get that?
I mean, that's the biggest tragedy of all with this case, right? I mean, a lot of the attention has been on Karen Read and what she's gone through and what she's going through in this trial. And today was definitely highlighted today with those text messages that came out. But of course, I mean, at the end of the day, no matter which side wins here at this point, the O'Keefe family loses, which is the greatest tragedy. They will not have any sort of sufficient answer as to what really happened and who's really responsible, and that person being held accountable for it, because so many questions have been presented, more questions than answers have been presented in this case as to Karen Read's potential guilt. And so many other questions have been opened up about who else is involved and the quality of the investigation. And, as has been brilliantly commented so far by everyone else here, is, how far does this rot go? I mean, obviously there's Trooper Proctor that is absolutely completely rotten to the core, in my personal opinion. But, these text messages were with his supervisors who did not reprimand him in any kind of a way. And that suggests that there's this whole office culture with the Massachusetts State Police. And as we've talked about before, there's also Canton PD that completely messed up the investigation on their end. So it's like every single level here. And of course, this then bleeds into questioning the medical examiner. And then the inverted footage bleeds over into the prosecutor's office, because Lally had to have known that was inverted and didn't bring up anything on direct examination. So, there's the O'Keefe family that is absolutely losing from this, and also the community at large, because how can anyone in this jurisdiction be able to look at their judicial system and say, yeah, I trust that the wheels of justice are turning as they should be. And I trust that if I'm ever a defendant or if I'm ever a victim, that justice will be served in the way that it should be. So it's just, unfortunately, I don't have any good answers for the O'Keefe family, but it's just a lot of frustrations and a lot of grief.
Yeah.
I just wanted to jump in really quickly as Alita was saying this. A few years back, we had the Annie Dugan fiasco, right? And so I think the hard part about this case is, at least in the Massachusetts, people have not forgotten about that, right? It is still having ripple impacts on our cases here, on our policing, even pretrial motions. Like, we are still dealing with that ripple effect. And so now, and that was on a more statewide level, right? Because you have state labs involved and things like that. Now it's coming to light that even in a smaller sector, like a small suburb community, they can't even have full faith in the policing that is happening in the suburbs. It's really, it's really hitting home for the constituents of the Commonwealth, where this bigger picture of, well, it happens statewide and it can happen locally. I think it's really sad. Just, is there justice for victims, right? People who actually are hurt and who need answers, and families who need answers. And so, as Alita was talking about that kind of just resonated with me, because we are still fighting, some of those Annie Duke motions, and it's kind of like right here, right? Even if they were to come up with another theory, could they find jurors to believe it? Because they can't even believe the evidence that was presented this way. There's so many holes and so many inconsistencies that even if they wanted to find another way to retry this, could they? Is there any credibility left?
Joel,
go ahead, Mark.
The other problem, and I agree with everything that both of you just said, that was really good stuff. But the crisis here goes beyond Karen Read. I mean, the Massachusetts State Police in this case, in particular, Proctor, is such a disaster. Proctor, let's call it what it is. He's a virus, and the only question is who catches it. I mean, this guy is still catching cases, apparently. Is a lead investigator.
Mark, I don't want to. Yeah, just real quick. So there's a comment here from Ragnar Rocker. What's exposure to, or what is the exposure to every case Proctor and company touch? So we got to look at that now, right?
Yeah, I mean, look, it's been reported, and I'm not the expert on this, but that Proctor was one of the main investigators on that god-awful Brian Walsh case, the guy who chopped up his wife, allegedly, and went on the internet. How do you do this? How do you do that? And any lawyer, on a case, we've all had cases where there's a bad cop and how it impacts things. And not every case would be dismissed depending on the role involvement. But you look at Proctor and you say, he works for the state police, but he's kind of like a liaison with the Norfolk DA or something that he said today. They knew when they called him as a witness, all this awful, awful crap was going to come out today. And it's as bad as I think any of us have ever seen in terms of a police officer just making comments about people in a case. They knew for months what this was. And he's apparently out there working as if nothing happened, which tells you that the DA's office, they're okay with that. Okay. But when does the virus spread and impact another case? Now, I think that Walsh case is in another county, if I'm right. You guys can correct me, in Massachusetts. But the point is, if he impacts that case and other cases, and it doesn't have to be a sensational murder case, it could be a drug case, it could be a domestic violence case, it can be anything. But these guys, and by extension, again, if the virus spreads, the other people that Proctor has dragged into this problem, like his supervisor, Yuri, he looks terrible, like condoning his behavior, not testifying about the legitimacy of the video, and where does it go beyond them? And the DA's office doesn't.
And he's Proctor's supervisor. By the way, he's on the stand today. We're not even talking about him, but Ann Gilman here says this is a mess. I believe there is a huge cover up. Mark, I just want to come back to you on this. So tense moments when Alan Jackson was crossing Michael Proctor today about David Yannetti, the defense attorney on his team. And he says, I hate that man. I truly hate that man. I'm going through his retarded client's phone right now. And then Proctor chalks it up to poor language on my part. Alan Jackson says completely offensive is another way to put it. What about this personal beef with the defense attorney? How would you handle this?
Oh, I think he handled it well. And the point they'll make in summation is that Yannetti is just the vessel for the hatred of Karen Read. It's not about Yannetti. It's about his, and pardon my language, because I don't like to talk like this, but for his retarded client, okay? It's not Yannetti. He's just the vessel for the hatred. And this Proctor, I mean, he comes off like a sociopath. He has no feeling of empathy towards what he's talking about, towards either Karen Reed or anything that he did. He basically was asked, well, how do you feel about Yannetti today? And he said, I still don't like him. How stupid do you have to be with everything going on to then turn it around and say, I still don't like you? And when he also said, well, I had a warrant for the phone, so I'm allowed to do it. I did nothing wrong. This guy does not think that anything he did was wrong. He's sorry he got caught. So it looks terrible. I think, Jackson's handling it masterfully. He's not even done. He's got a lot more to go. I assume on Wednesday he'll be up there for God knows how long about many different topics. But it goes back to what we talked about earlier, too, about prepping witnesses. I mean, if you were going to pop this balloon in direct, do it in a way that actually diffuses, gives the jury some comfort, not much. I mean, you can only fix what you can fix, but prepare them. And Lally, I mean, give him credit for this, if that's the right word, made it worse. And you wouldn't think that's possible, that you could make it worse by diffusing the balloon. And he did, because he put it all out there in such an offensive fashion. And then, of course, Jackson's going to go through it all again. And he gets 2 for the price of 1 without the sympathy and empathy that ought to have come out both from Lally and Proctor. Just a complete own goal disaster.
Yeah, it's almost like Lally he forgot that he was supposed to deflate the balloon, not reinflate it.
Alita, to you, I'm the lay person here. You're all attorneys, but if I'm being honest, and if I'm a juror on this trial right now, I'm starting to not even, and I hate to say this, but I think this is the mindset with a lot of people. I don't even know how closely I'm even looking at the evidence, because there's such a swirl of insanity going on with so many, like Morgietta said, WTF moments. Is the evidence itself or lack thereof, is it being lost on the jurors right now because of everything else going on?
Well, I don't know. I mean, because like I said earlier, even
frozen. Let's see if she comes back. 3, 2. It worked last time.
Sorry, I'm back.
You're back.
I'm back. Okay. So I don't know how much you heard me say before
very little.
The internet froze up. So I was going to say that even before those offensive text messages came out, there already were questions coming from Trooper Proctor's testimony about that taillight and how that fit with Nicholas or Officer Barros's testimony. And there even if you take away these more offensive things and these more emotional kind of things, there still are so many questions that just have not been answered, and more questions that have been introduced in terms of how the evidence actually fits together. So it's like, even if you take away all of this other crazy stuff, which the defense has done a fantastic job of right from the outset, just calling into question the legitimacy of the investigation. I mean, from like the very first witnesses, they've done a fantastic job of putting the prosecution on the back foot in terms of having to try to show that this is legitimate here. But even aside from that, I think that the way that these things are fitting or not fitting is on its own an issue for the prosecution.
By the way, everyone, STS Nation, since we have these 3 bright legal minds, how about the last 15, 20 minutes? Put in triple Qs here, and I will, in rapid fire succession, get your questions to the best guest. So just put in a triple Q here. There's a comment, a tweet here, Morgietta, from Dag Nabbit, who says, Aiden Kearney, he is AKA Turtle Boy. He was right about everything, Dag Nabbit says, in all caps, the everything. These MFers deserved every last moment of misery he caused them. He was right, and Trooper Proctor is a effing, and it rhymes with bunt. There's anger out there now. I'm just wondering what you think of this, because, again, there was this mania ahead of the trial about this, quote, frame job that a lot of people thought was complete lunacy. And now I'm not saying that people are buying it hook, line, and sinker. But I think just the chaos surrounding this case is making everyone now question what is really going on, what really happened to Ken.
Yeah. And, it goes to that cliche saying where if you point the finger, there are 3 fingers pointing right back at you, right? And so this is what is essentially the summation of the prosecution's case. They're pointing the finger at Karen Reed, not realizing there's 3 fingers pointing at them, which kind of shows that it's a hot mess, and they didn't take the due diligence to clean up that mess before they make that presentation. And when you're accusing someone of something, right, everybody is innocent until proven guilty, but when you accuse someone of something, that's huge. And if you can't back up those allegations, then you better have a real good reason why you're wasting my time and the taxpayers' time and everyone else's time televising this. Luckily, it hasn't gotten huge national attention, but close to national attention without having all of your ducks in a row. So I can see why people are angry, right? People have been watching this for weeks, taking days off of work, camping out in front of the courthouse. This is not your, just typical run-of-the-mill case. So the anger is coming from the fact that there was an expectation to be met. And to be quite honest, I don't think that they're even close to making that expectation, right? At least from the prosecution's standpoint. And so people are going to get really upset at that. And not to mention, like we've all said, a life has been taken. And this investigation, for lack of better words, is a hot mess, right? And how do you provide justice to this family, whether or not you think she's innocent or guilty, without having a straight and narrow path to what actually happened to John O'Keefe when he passed away? Like that is the crucial question that we still have not had answered. And that's really frustrating, not only to the O'Keefe family, but to everyone. We've been waiting, right? And so the frustration is truly warranted from everyone who has literally been invested into this case and into the outcome of this case.
So now it's STS Nation's been waiting as well. Here come the questions in rapid fire succession. Kamala Norris. Mark, what do you think of Proctor having crystal clear photos of Officer O'Keefe's SUV and not one of KR? Interesting question.
Just another classic strike to Proctor's credibility. The bottom line is this. He said, I immediately thought it was a car accident because John O'Keefe only had one shoe on, which, that's kind of hard to believe at the basis. But the bottom line is that's what he said, amongst other things. And he said he went down to Karen Reed's parents' house in Dighton and that the tow truck was already being called, putting aside the legality of taking her vehicle, which is an interesting conversation for another day, perhaps. The bottom line is it was clear to him, I think the car is, for lack of a better term, the murder weapon here, right? So there's the car at her parents' house, long before it ever touches the Sally port where all the bad allegations are going to be made. And this trained investigator who has no personal animus or nothing never takes a single picture of the car upon first coming in contact with it, with metadata establishing the date and time of when this was. That is law enforcement 101. He never does that. He never does it the first time they take it right to the Sally port. In fact, the first time they ever take a picture of the car, Lally put in this video today, and it's, again, what are you doing? Is when they called the crime scene unit about 4 days later after the taillight had already been broken in whichever way, and took photos of that. So how are you going to find him credible when he says, I knew all along that this had to be a car accident, but I'm a trained investigator, but I can't take a freaking picture of the car, of the taillight that I'm telling you, ladies and gentlemen, looked like the way I dragged it in court. But there's evidence that will help my case, so to speak, the John O'Keefe vehicle, and that he right away, here come the pictures. It doesn't make sense. He's just not credible in anything he says.
Yeah, and it is bizarre that there's never been a clear shot of that taillight if it's at the center of this entire case. Aniello to Alyte here. Hey, we've seen weirder things happen. If the jury is hung, will the Commonwealth try Karen Reed again? What do you think?
I don't know. I mean, if they're smart, in my opinion, they won't, because this is a huge expense to the public, and to try to go through all of this again, and based on everything that's come out, I think it's a terrible idea.
There you go. And look, I love it. She gives legal bites, literally and figuratively. Nice short bites. Reality check here to Morgietta. Could the defense have asked, interesting question, or presented the photo of the taillight in the Sally port to Barrows? He was the guy that was on the stand today. Didn't really have any skin in the game.
Yeah, and I want to reel this back in too about what the defense's job is. It's still the prosecution's case in chief, right? So really the defense's job is to create that reasonable doubt in the prosecution's case. And they've done a really, really good job at that. So they technically don't have to present anything or, really just kind of like discredit the information that's being presented. I think it's interesting that they didn't do that. But I mean, come on, after the testimony of Trooper Proctor, I would let that sit. Let that sit with the jury, and let that lack of credibility be the last thing that they're focusing on, because that is more powerful, what they heard, what they saw, the reaction or a lack of reaction, than a little photograph. I shouldn't say little, but at the center of this, they're staring at Trooper Proctor, and I'm sure we can't see their faces, but I'm sure there are a few jaws that were dropped. So I would let that sit with them. That's more powerful than presenting the photo.
Russian Aloha, how long, and they spelled it HOS, funny touch there. How long till the Alberts, McCabe's, Higgins, and all the others are arrested? Mark Betterow, I don't know if we ever get there, but what do you think? I mean, what happens after this trial to these people, if anything?
It's impossible to know. I mean, you don't know what federal investigations, especially corruption ones that could be involving, again, investigations doesn't mean prosecution, big difference, but involving allegations of official corruption and planting evidence and process crimes like perjury and all this other stuff. It could take a long time. It may never come to fruition. I mean, I don't want to pass the buck, but you don't know what they know, what they're looking at, and whether it will ultimately bear any fruit. I think that this trial will, attract more of their interest, given some of the testimony that you've heard and the way some of the evidence is coming out. But what will ever happen with it? It would be speculating. Who knows?
Alita from Aria Dakota, Grimaldi Lane, one of the coolest names in all the YouTube. If the prosecution does decide to stop the case, how would this happen? And how does that affect Karen going forward? Would she be recharged at some point? What would happen if they, file a motion to dismiss?
Well, if they decided to voluntarily dismiss the case with or with prejudice, would be the way that would be determined. With prejudice, meaning they recognize that they can't bring it back. Without prejudice, meaning they reserve the right to bring the case again. At this stage in the game, I don't know.
I'm sorry.
Go ahead. Yeah, go ahead.
I was just going to add, Jeopardy's attached here. So
yeah.
if they dismiss, it's over.
Yeah, that's fair enough. Because I was going to say, the fact that it's like halfway through trial at this point, it's unfair to say, well, we're not doing a good enough job. Let's retry from the very beginning.
Yeah. Morgietta from Truth and Transparency. Interesting scenario here. These are hypotheticals, obviously. Can Lally come forward and tell DA Morrissey to finish the case himself, because I simply cannot prosecute an innocent woman? Be a mic drop moment for sure, but what would ever happen if that was the case? I mean, what if a prosecutor does not believe in the case that they are trying? I'm not saying that is what is going on here, but hypothetically speaking.
Yeah, and maybe Mark, you can tell me how the inner office workings work, but I don't imagine that Lally has a choice at this point. He represents the Commonwealth as an assistant, district attorney, and he has we'll call it a job to fulfill.
Yeah, I mean, there are rare times where an individual prosecutor, not the DA, may object to prosecuting a case on moral, legal, ethical grounds. And in theory, they should step away. The problem with this particular case is Lally has had this case for a couple of years. He knows the evidence. There's no surprises. I think I agree that some of the testimony came out in just a disastrous way, which shouldn't have been surprising. Maybe it was, but in terms of what the evidence was, he's known, so he's stuck with it. And for him at this point to say, I quit in the middle of the trial, and you, Morrissey, figure out. I mean, I just think that's not realistic, just the way the real world works. But I mean, Lally has issues like Morrissey in that how could they not know what a disaster this was for the past several months? And here they are. But at this point, yeah, I know he goes down with the ship. I agree.
Yeah, I think it's a bigger disaster than they ever anticipated. X John X here to Alita. Is it possible that Michael Proctor could be, and we were talking about this just a day or so ago before he ever took the stand, could he be advised to plead the fifth? The cat's out of the bag now, but curious why he didn't go in there pleading the fifth. If I knew this was going to be the testimony, I think not even being a lawyer, if I was him, I would have said, I'm taking the fifth. What do you say, Alita?
I mean, that is it's quite a question. And, you know, folks have asked me that in my chat as well. It's kind of one of those damned if you do, damned if you don't situations, because if he plays the fifth, that leaves the prosecution's case really high and dry as the lead investigator in this case. And especially after so much has been said about him, and there are still text messages that are out there that he wouldn't necessarily be testifying to, but could come in through other witnesses, for example. So, you know, to some extent, maybe it's helpful to have him there to sit there and be grilled, you know, try to give some sort of context. I don't know. I think that this is a lose-lose situation from Proctor's standpoint, regardless of the Fifth Amendment, whether he were to have invoked it previously or not. But at this point, no, there's no saving it with the Fifth Amendment. You can't decide halfway through your testimony to just plead the fifth and walk away.
Yeah, he's screwed, to use a colloquialism. Speedy Lee here. To Morgietta, why do you think they didn't ask Yuri Buchanan about those text messages since he was part of the group? Was it a surprise factor? Interesting question. Didn't come up, Tim.
Yeah, you know, and I think we said it earlier. I think the idea was to try to deflate the balloon, right? And that totally did not happen with Proctor, right? So, you know, from that perspective, you don't want to keep redrawing the attention back to these messages, even if he was a part of this group, because at this point, the point has already been made. I think on the prosecution side, a poorly made point. So from a strategic point of view, I would then call another witness to then again talk more about these messages and involvement that this particular group was having, because it's only going to inflame the thought process of the jury that, oh, wow, you all really were in on it. Like, great. Okay, everybody. And we're hearing it again. And so I think, I'm assuming from a strategic point of view, that doesn't really help to deflate the balloon, so to speak.
Back to Alita from Moto 88, friend of the show here. Panel opinions on odds of a directed verdict or partially directed verdict. Alita, what does this even mean, and what are the odds?
So we're talking about dismissing the case after the prosecution decides to rest their case in chief. The odds are slim to none in any kind of a case. The judge is going to say if there is a single scintilla of evidence, right? That's a standard that the judge is going to be looking for as to each element. If there's a scintilla of evidence that you know that there is something here that can sort of check this box for each element of each charge, then no, it's going to proceed towards the defense's case in chief. The judge is not supposed to be weighing the evidence. So if it seems like this is ridiculous evidence, but there technically is something there that a reasonable jury could, you know, look at in a mildly ambiguous kind of way, then the judge is not going to not going to find in favor of the defense for a directed verdict.
Here's a legal question from Mark. A couple more questions, then we'll get final thoughts and wrap this up. Mark, can you explain voir dire for defense witnesses if they're good and reliable for the feds? Why not this judge? I think we're talking about this bite mark expert that they were talking about in the pre-motion hearing today.
Yeah, I think that, and I think even the accident reconstruction people, they were actually the ones that the feds hired, engaged. I mean, look, the DA is complaining that they may have the wrong expertise, I think, as it relates to the accident reconstruction people. and they were caught off guard about the dog bite stuff. So the judge says, bring them in, have an evidentiary hearing. Let's get offers of proof and make sure that they're qualified. Let's make sure that the testimony would be relevant to some issue and whatnot. I mean, it's more just a waste of time than anything else. I can't imagine that any of these witnesses are going to be precluded from testifying because they don't have the right expertise or the right credentials or relevant testimony. But I think what the judge had said was that, you know, even though they were hired by the feds, that we don't know how they reached their conclusion. And apparently the defense has been prevented from talking to them, so they don't really have much to add in that regard. But I mean, look, the accident reconstruction people were engaged by the federal government to determine whether this car accident theory made sense, and apparently, according to them, so we're told, their position was no. So it's going to be hard, as long as they have the right credentials and an opinion that is relevant and just makes sense, that they would be precluded from testifying. This would be the most quintessential exculpatory evidence that one could ever imagine, that a witness hired by the government is called by the defense to say that the DA's theory doesn't wash. So we're talking reversible error type stuff. Not that I think she'll ever get convicted, but if she did, to preclude that kind of defense testimony would be, that would most likely be a big error.
Better, we are a dog-friendly show. What kind of dog do you have? I never asked.
I have two. I have a lab and a rescue mutt who's a little bit of everything. That's the lab.
Oh, there you go. I love it. Love labs and I love mutts. Hope always. This I'm going to toss to Morgietta. How can we as Massachusetts residents ask for these guys' jobs to be terminated? Followed by this comment: the whole Massachusetts State Police needs to be investigated. I mean, there's got to be a lot of unhappy troopers tonight who do great work. The majority of law enforcement officers do amazing work, and it's always a few bad in the bunch who give everyone a black eye. But Morgietta, if people are concerned, what can they do?
Yeah, you know, I think it goes back to kind of what everyone is saying, and just exercise. This case is a great case in exercising your rights in terms of voting rights, being more involved, civic engagement. You know, I think the vocability of both sides really speaks to people's involvement about where they live and what they can do to make change and how they can be more invested in their community. And I think it really just comes down to just taking those moments and really understanding, you know, where your tax dollars are going, being more involved in community and things of that nature. That's how change is going to happen, right? It's just, you know, unfortunate that it had to come as a result of, you know, a homicide, you know, trial. That'll, you know, some of these inconsistencies and small bad apples are coming to light, but hopefully this will engage people, you know, to be more involved in just civic engagement.
Now, I'm going to read a tweet that a lot of people are going to say is from a troll, but I can assure you it is not. This is Jimmy McNulty, who actually watches this show religiously. He's been a trial watcher since the OJ days, and he is very meticulous. He watches the trial, unlike what I'm accused of, all day. And this was his tweet. I'm going to feed him to the wolf, Mark Betterow. This was Jimmy McNulty's tweet today. Again, this is not a troll, Mark, but he says, I still think it was a good day for the state. Proctor got on the stand and admitted to saying bad things about a suspect in their case. It's not the first nor the last lead detective to do such. Doesn't affect the evidence. Cops cuss, jury gets it. Your response?
Honestly, please. The bottom line here is the day started with Yuri denying that they misled about the video, a second video coming in with Proctor, was followed by a very credible police officer who completely undermines everything that Proctor said, and was followed by Proctor and the text messages. And with all due respect to anyone, to try to defend as harmless and however he described the comments that were made by Proctor, those were disgusting, disgraceful by a guy with a badge. They were misogynist. There was evidence of per se corruption, talking about getting gifts for, helping witnesses and whatnot. There was evidence of attempting to improperly influence a medical examiner. He called Karen Reed words that I'm not going to mention on the air. It would be offensive to all of us to hear. He personally violated her by disclosing her physical condition and everything else that you saw him do. And he did it again and again and again. And to give him credit for saying he admitted he said it, give me a break. The guy admitted it because the feds turned it over to the defense and he had no choice. And he didn't have a shred of sympathy in his little mock apologies about it was wrong. The guy is a corrupt, disgraced, pathetic police officer, and anyone who tries to defend him and say that he, as the star witness of the case, doesn't impact what's happening in the courtroom and the jury's view, and that it's a good day for the prosecution. If that's a good day, I sure as hell don't want to know what a bad day is, because it's got to be Armageddon and we're all going to die, because you could not have had a worse day as a prosecutor than Adam Lally had today. It was as rock bottom gets. And to try to dismiss these comments as nothing more than just, guys being guys. I'm a guy. It's disgusting what he did.
I got to say this again. I think I mentioned it earlier. The Mass PD here, by the way, this is Faces of Meth. That's a scary photo, but the Mass PD is full of bullies, incels, and dirty cops. Shame on them. Telemark. I don't know about that. I don't know if it goes to incels, but look,
yeah, I'm touching that.
Yeah, I would definitely question that. But something stinks in Canton. Unless you were in the house that night, it is my contention you don't know what really happened, but there is something amiss. Something just doesn't add up. Something, whatever that is being covered up. And, I don't think I wanted to believe it at first, but here we are. And we're going to see how this all plays out. An amazing panel tonight. Alina Mazeika. She's also the founder of the YouTube channel Legal Bites, BYTES, and she sums things up beautifully and succinctly, even with an iffy Wi-Fi. Alina, your final thoughts here.
Thank you. Today was really the first day that I walked away, and like I said, I'm slow to come to conclusions, but today was the first day that I really walked away and felt like, why is this case being brought to why?
Ooh, here we go. We're going out the way we came in. She's going to come back. She always does. Here we go.
I'm back.
You're back.
So like I said before, last time this happened, I don't know exactly what you guys heard, but today was the first day for me that I walked away from trial feeling like I don't know why this case was brought to trial. I don't know, how the prosecution can possibly come back from this, because, regardless of who's on this jury, but the fact that there are 10 women on this jury, there's a very healthy chance that at least 1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
She's making us. It's the suspense here at the end. And she's back. And she's back. And she's not back. Morgietta, we'll have you pick it up here. Morgietta Derzier is an attorney, an esquire. Wow. Alita is really frozen up this time. But Morgietta, your final thoughts. Are we going to see a mistrial here, a motion to dismiss? What's your crystal ball telling you?
Again, we are not going to see a motion to dismiss. Okay, I'm sorry. That's just my personal opinion. Just leave that on the table there. But I am shocked because I do believe in looking at all the evidence and letting the evidence play out. And I did not form an opinion, just like Alita. I did have my doubts in the beginning because of the way that the case was playing out. But, I agree with Mark. Today was a bad day for the prosecution. There is no two ways about it. It was it was disheartening. It was sad. It was hurtful. Again, not only to Karen Reed, but to the O'Keefe family, for the lead prosecutor. This is the faith that they had in their community, and just to see how that was portrayed today was an utter disaster. So we hope for good to come, but today was kind of hard. It's a hard hill, particularly for me, to see how the rest of this trial is going to play out, especially when you've had several other witnesses who I believe were a little bit not credible. But today, yeah, that's a hard pill to swallow.
By the way, I'm hearing it's 10 women on the jury. 2 of them are Asian American. Observer says Asian women are socially conservative. All the profanity from Proctor has to leave a very bad taste in their mouths. We're about to find that out in the next couple of weeks. Alyte, I want to give you a chance to sum up your thoughts there.
Yeah. So I just, I don't know how they can come back from this. I was saying that how many of these women that are on the jury have been objectified in their experiences throughout their life? How many of them have gone through physical or mental health issues, or loved ones who also might be offended by all of that? And women, just like any other demographic, are not a monolith. We've got differing opinions on all kinds of things, but there are some experiences that are also very common that may, in fact, inflame them to a certain degree. I know that I myself feel quite inflamed by the text messages that came out today. And for Trooper Proctor to then turn around to the jury and say, "But trust me, bro, it didn't affect the investigation in any possible way." It's like, how can you possibly believe that? Like, how can anyone trust that? So it's this case. Although I keep waiting for the prosecution to put on something that is going to help their case, it seems like the more this case drags on, the worse the evidence gets for the prosecution. And we haven't even gotten to the defense's case in chief.
Well said. The last word goes to criminal defense attorney Mark Beto, originally from Middlesex County, Massachusetts, now living on the island of Manhattan. Mark, your final thoughts.
Well, I agree with everything else. I mean, it's just a matter of time with this case. But, I kind of think back to the beginning of the case, and one of the realities we have in New York, perhaps more than other places, are, losing police officers, and sometimes in the line of duty, sometimes in incidents like we've had here. And when there is an investigation in New York City into the death of a police officer, you never saw more cooperation amongst law enforcement agencies. You never saw more dedication between prosecutors, the NYPD, whoever else, and the amount of work that was done. And I'm not saying it's right to give a police officer more attention than anyone else who's killed. The point is, it happens. I mean, they treat the death of a brother or sister officer like nothing else. And I just can't get my hand around why the death of John O'Keefe was treated the exact opposite. He's treated just like a dead corpse on the lawn of another cop's house, who seemed to get all the attention. Okay. The homeowner police officer seemed to get all the attention, whereas John O'Keefe is just, this is terrible. He's just a corpse in this case, and I don't understand it. The state police didn't want to get involved originally. If you remember, they declined to create a crime scene. They abandoned the crime scene. So it went to, who was talking earlier about solo cups and leaf blowers and all that stuff. They never treated his death seriously. Then you have Proctor and these other guys are more interested in bragging about their involvement in the case and objectifying the defendant and all that stuff. I mean, they had to have known the possibility that some of that would get out at some point, could harm the case. They didn't appear to do any serious work in vouchering evidence. Death of a police officer, don't have time for that. They everything they did in this case investigatively is so off. It's so wrong. It's so suspicious. And it's a case involving the death of a police officer. And to me, it's another one of these things that goes back to why a lot of people think something is wrong here with mysterious and sketchy, because there were really two police officers, as we said in this case, and everything in this case is skewed towards protecting the homeowner cop at the expense of the family of the dead police officer. And you even had some of those text messages come out today. I bet you that Boston cop who owned the home is in a lot of trouble. Nope. He's a Boston cop. So after all the stuff that you talk about, there's one text message to put a bow on it all. Michael Proctor, the corrupt, dirty cop that he is, misogynist and everything else, told his buddies on January 29th, nothing's going to happen to him. He's a Boston cop. And you know what? That's exactly how it played out. And I wouldn't be surprised if Jackson in the summation refers to that as kind of an ominous telling of this whole sordid case. And it's just unfortunate for John O'Keefe's family. And I don't think he and his family won't get justice because this case was botched the day it happened.
And that is a devastating outcome of all this. The irony there is that Brian Albert and Brian Higgins were actually coming from a service for a fallen NYPD officer the evening before. But Mark makes an amazing point. Officer John O'Keefe, Boston police officer John O'Keefe, his investigation was not treated the way other police officers' investigations are and should be treated, in my opinion. But another amazing panel. Look, we had one consecutive day of court, so we need a day off, but we will have a show tomorrow night, and we will be back with full coverage Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, along with shows afterwards. Thank you to our amazing best guests. And till next time, love you, America. Love you, New York City. Love you, Boston. Love you wherever Alita is around the world.
California.
And California. And of course, love you, Canton, Mass. And thinking of John O'Keefe, Officer John O'Keefe and his family tonight. Till next time.